Welcome to Up All Night DIY. I'm Monica. Thanks for joining me. So to put me in the Christmas spirit, I was thinking about time spent as a kid admiring all of the holiday novelties and displays at local 5 and 10s. It was a world full of tinsel, bright colors, and wonder. So that made me think it would be a lot of fun to create our own 5 and dime treasure. Let's get into it. I'll be using some DAS air dry clay. You can use whatever clay you prefer. Totally up to you. We'll need a 1.4 and a 1.9 inch foam ball and some toothpicks. For our base, I'll be using a block of wood. Found this in my scrap pile. Measures approximately 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches-ish. I printed out a vintage Shiny Brite graphic that we'll be attaching to the wood to replicate a vintage box. We're also going to need some doodads like a mini bottle brush tray, mini ornaments, and other bits and bobs. We'll decide when we get there. Our dime store tchotchke is going to need a cute Snowkid, so let's create a flat spot on our smaller ball. This will be his head, so you can see we just pressed a flat spot into the ball by pressing down on the table. We'll create 2 flat spots on the larger ball by pressing the top of the foam ball with a jar lid. That'll create the top flat spot, and of course the table creates the bottom. This is going to allow us to stack our foam balls just like this. Let's lob off a bit of clay here. And we're going to knead it to condition it. This makes the clay more pliable and it distributes the moisture, which should help prevent cracking. So I'm going to do this for a couple minutes until I feel like, the clay's ready to go. We're going to roll it out nice and flat. This should be enough to cover both balls. I'm going to cut off enough to cover that small ball first, and we're just going to press it into the foam, making sure, that it really sticks. I'm going to pull off this extra clay that I have here, and I'm going to place that on the bare spots that I have. And if you guys have been watching me, you know the deal. This is how we always do it, right? And as always, the next step is to roll it around on the table to smooth it out as best we can. This both smooths it and also helps the clay really adhere to the foam. I'm going to mist my clay really lightly and use my fingers to smooth out any bumps. I don't want to add too much water because that will shrink the clay as it dries, and then that'll cause cracking. And of course we don't want that. Fritz, our wee Snowkid, is going to need a wee pointy hood, so we're going to roll out a cane of clay, pointing it at one end, and we're just going to do that by applying more pressure at the one end of the cane. Let's cut it down a wee tad and flatten the bottom somewhat, like so, just pressing it on the table. It really doesn't have to be too big, because we just want it to be a wee bump at the top of his hood. I'm going to push half a toothpick into the top of his head. Not quite center, it's more toward the back. And we're going to slide the point onto that toothpick. I'm going to dampen the clay around the bottom of the point with this wee paintbrush here. And using my pointy clay tool, I'll pull the clay from the point down, spreading it over the clay on the ball, incorporating it, so that it looks like it's all one piece. This is a little too tall and a little too pointy, so I'm going to pull a wee bit from the top and kind of round it out a wee bit. Yeah, I think that's good. We'll go with that. I want his hood to have fur trim, so we're going to roll another cane of clay, nice and thin. Before adding it on, I'm going to score the clay where I want to attach it. Just kind of dabbing little score marks in there, and we're going to push the cane into place. Wrapping it right around in an arch to frame out his face. And we're going to trim off the excess. And we're going to incorporate it just like before with our pointy tool, just blending the clay from the trim with the clay on the head. You know what I'm saying. And we're going to blend that clay all the way around until we have a nice frame for his face. I roll out a tiny wee ball of clay and cut it in half to create his cheeks. And I'm going to roll out a teeny cone shape for his nose. The nose is really kind of tiny. Right, gang, so let's push his cheeks on and incorporate them. We're going to have to do this gently so we don't jack up the shape with our tool. We'll pop his nose right between the cheeks and incorporate that too. And again, this is so tiny. It just really needs a tiny little, ever so slight little bit of incorporating. I give him dimples by pushing my tool up from the bottom of his cheek, creating a wee divot. You could do this with a paintbrush handle, a toothpick, whatever you got. We're going to cover the bigger ball with the rest of the clay that we rolled flat earlier in the exact same way. So let's jump ahead. I want to give him wee welly boots. So I roll a short, round, flattened marshmallow shape, otherwise known as a circle. And this is going to be his legs. It's more of a base, really. Why I didn't use my circle cookie cutter, it's a mystery. But anyway, if you have a circle cookie cutter, you just want a little bit of thickness to the clay. So you could do it that way. Or you could do it the hard way, like I'm doing right here. Either way, we got there in the end. Anywho, we're going to use a toothpick to anchor the leg/base to the bottom of his body. We're going to fill the space between his leg base and the body with a thin cane of clay. Lightly dampening it, just a smidge, and incorporating it by spreading the clay with our wee pointy tool. Now we're going to anchor his head to his body by pushing a toothpick into the top center of the body, and we'll push the head onto the toothpick, centering it. And we're going to need to fill that gap too with a cane of clay and incorporate it same as before. And we're rolling. Another cane of clay, this time for his arms, a little bit thicker. We'll cut that cane in half, giving us both arms. We'll add bits of toothpick into the side of his body to anchor his arms. And we are going to pop his arm onto that toothpick and incorporate it, same as before. It's always basically the same. I'm dampening a little bit more here because the clay was starting to get dry. So I wanted to make sure that it didn't fall apart while we were working on it. Fritz will be holding a bottle brush tree in his right arm, so I'm going to use the wire from that tree to make a hole in his arm where it's going to go. To make his feet, I roll a ball of clay and cut it in half. We're going to attach them right next to each other on the leg base, of course in the front of his body, and I'm going to score the clay first and then place them and incorporate them. Scoring the clay helps the other clay, the new clay, stick to it. That's why we do that. Right, so once his feet are in place, we can set him aside to dry overnight. Meanwhile, let's work on the wood piece. Now he's going to be standing on top of this. This is going to be his base. I picked out Americana Sugared Peach paint. This is pretty close to the background color on the graphic. Yeah, it's pretty close in hue. We'll give the entire block 2 full coats. This is a very pretty, subtle color, very subtly peach. I'm going to use some of my Sobo glue to attach the label to the block. I'm just going to spread it from end to end, make sure that the entire graphic is covered. Did I mention that I printed this out on cardstock? I did that just for the extra body. I feel like it's much easier to handle than if I printed it on regular paper. You feel me? So I'm going to do my best to center that, and then I'm going to squeegee it to make sure that it's nice and flat. Now we're going to add these wee labels to the side. So I'm going to use this red ink here. I meant to do this before I attached the label, but you can plainly see I'm all over the place today. Anyway, I'll edge the labels as well as the block first with red ink, and then we're going to come back, grunge it up with my favorite Tim Holtz Vintage Photograph Distressing ink. I think this adds the perfect sepia touch, really giving it a vintage look. You know, I've been on a sparkle jag lately, so I'm going to dampen the craft toothbrush, dip it in Ceramcoat watermelon, and pull my thumb across the bristles to get that splatter. And we're going to repeat that process, this time with Americana Bittersweet Chocolate, and then I'm going to spray this with a clear matte sealer. Fritz has had a good night's sleep, he's dry and ready for paint. I'm going to give his face 2 coats of Ceramcoat White. His coat and his hood are going to get 2 coats of Ceramcoat Watermelon, my favorite red. I leave his hands unpainted for the moment. I'm also going to leave the fur trim untouched. We'll get to those in a snap. His mittens and his boots are going to get 2 coats of Ceramcoat Parsley. It's this vibrant, lively green. I think it pairs really nicely with the watermelon. These colors are all personal choice. You could do whatever color, suits you. Go with that. Now that his mittens are done, we're going to hit up those boots of his, those pudgy little toes. I sketched on his eyes and his mouth with a pencil, and we're going to paint them in with Hippo Gray. They're very basic, simple arch shapes. I do give him little stroke eyebrows too. We're going to dry brush his cheeks with Ceramcoat Tropic Bay Blue. Again, one of my favorite colors. And we're going to get in there, build that color up until we're happy with it. And you know what? I'm going to do a little on his nose too. I'm going to do wee Tropic Bay lines under his eyes and his mouth. Just a little detail, a little bit of shading. And now it's time to shade. So we're pulling out our folk art floating medium. I'm going to prep my brush with the medium here, this clear gel, getting a good coat on the bristles. I scoop up some Tropic Bay onto the corner of my brush, side loading. I'm stroking the brush on my plate. This will blend the medium with the paint on the bristles. It's going to give us a gradient of color from dark to light. Darkest where the paint is on the corner of our brush. I'm going to place that paint corner where I want my shadow to go. So right along the edge of his face. And I'm just going to float in that shading, just basically outlining his face. I reload my brush when necessary. I'm going to keep my stroke nice and light, feathery. We're going to add some details to his mittens with white, little snowflakes in the center of his mittens, little strokes right up at the edge. I want to keep him really nice and simple. Some white dot buttons down his belly. And I'm going to add parsley dots onto the white dots. Now we are going to float his mittens and his boots with Americana Festive Green. This is slightly darker than the parsley, and it'll add just a nice variation of color there to give us the impression of shade, shadow. And I'm going right along the edge, and I pretty much, you guys know, I put it where I think it looks good. So I say run with that, trust yourself. If you don't like it, you could always paint over it, no biggie. I'm going to dot those parsley dots on the white buttons with a little festive green, since, we have it on the go. Why not? Onto his jacket and his hood, we're going to use Americana Cherry Red to shade the watermelon. Again, I think this is a deep enough contrast, yet it's very soft. It's not too harsh and in your face. It's just right. They're perfect complementary colors. So again, we're pretty much floating around anywhere where there would be a shadow. So right along the edges, in the creases of his arms, and, around his neckline, any place like that. I'm not going to go too nuts, because I thought we could keep him relatively simple to mimic a mid-mod tchotchke vibe. Let's add some wee tiny stripes around his nose with watermelon. I'm using my 000 detail brush for this, going very lightly, very thin. And as I mentioned, I'm not much for a carrot nose for this fella. I think this is better. And when I'm not adding swirls to their cheeks, I like to give my characters glitter dots. So I'm just going to dot on some of that watermelon onto his cheeks and sprinkle a little matching glitter right on top. It adds a little festive sparkle. And since we're already into the glitter, let's add some to the graphic too. I'll tie it all together. You feel me? I think the glitter really gives it that authentic feel, a real retro feel to it. So you guys, we're going to be using some snow text to create the fur on his coat, and I'm just going to tap it into place. I started out using a little dowel, but that wasn't working great, so I switched over to a paintbrush, and that was 100% better. Now if you don't have snow text on hand, you could always use spackling, that works, dimensional paint, or texture paste. I'm going to hit that with some glamour dust, and then we're going to add some of the snow around his neck and around his wrist, and of course we're going to sprinkle that too. Once that snow text has dried, it dries pretty quickly, we're going to pounce on a top coat of Decor multi-purpose sealer for protection and for a nice finished look. I find it easiest to apply it with a cosmetic sponge. Just pouncing, easy peasy. I'm going to be using some fabric fix glue to attach his embellishments. We'll get a candy cane in his left hand, and of course his bottle brush tree tucked into his right arm. Both of these things, the candy cane and the tree, they're from that mini set that you can get at Hobby Lobby. I think Michael's has it too, for mini Christmas trees. That's all these are. Time to affix him to the wood block. Once again, I'm using fabric glue. Wood glue would also work, would probably actually be better. I couldn't get the lid off my wood glue, so Fabrifix it is. And I'm going to use a little bit of hot glue just for a quick hold. Now, hot glue's not great on wood, so it's really just to keep him steady until the fabric glue dries. I'm going to fill in the space around him with more of the snow text. I'm just plopping it on there with a craft stick, as you can see. I also want to give it a fresh fallen snow look, so I'll dab a wee bit of it down the sides, just lightly. And then it'll get a sprinkle of glamour dust to add that snowy, glistening shimmer. See what I mean? Just a little here at the corners. I think that makes it look a little more organic. A little sprinkle. I have here some mini ornaments, and we're just going to nestle them into the snow to ramp up that five and dime vibe and, you know, the whole Christmas kitsch. Maybe we'll add a little garland to just tuck it in there. You'll get to see what I did in the final reveal. Shall we take a look at our homemade dime store decor? One of the requirements of good old-fashioned Christmas novelty trinket is a whimsical wee character. And I think Fritz ticks that box. He's simple in both color and structure, yet he's full of charm and joy. From the tip of his stripy nose to his pudgy wee boots, he is just pleased with his darling wee tree and jumbo candy cane. He radiates kitschy Christmas soul. The vintage Shiny Brite label takes us back to those classic bedazzling ornaments that enchanted us as kids. Am I right? The glistening snow, sparkling balls, the wee tufts of metallic, shiny garland just tucked in there add a final touch of retro holiday delight. I love this wee guy. I think he's cheery and charming and gives me all the Christmas feels. You know what I'm saying? Let me know what you guys think. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. Stay creative, my friends. Thanks for hanging with me. See you next time. Up all night with Monica.